And what's happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you if you stumbled upon this podcast because you like my guest and you're like, oh, I wonder who this guy is that's interviewing him. Well, thank you. Thank you for checking it out. Give me a 5-star review or don't. I don't really care. But if you want more content from me, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur. TonyMazur for $3, $5, and $10 tiers. You get extra content, video, and all that fun stuff. All the saucy content that's gotten me in trouble and or fired from other jobs. But yes, my name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for being a part of this and listening and watching this. It's on YouTube, Rumble, and the major podcast platforms. And my guest this week is a guy I've actually been a fan of for a bit. And I'm shocked that I was able to have him on the show based on what's been going on. But I got an opportunity to talk to this guy here. Played for the Nationals back in the. Oh wait, hang on. Wait. This isn't you, right? This is somebody else.
I wish it was.
No, it's so it's not Michael Morse, the guy who played with the Washington Nationals back in the day, and was a pretty good slugger. I think won a championship for the San Francisco Giants. Yeah. You're Mike Morse, the comedian and the writer, right?
I'm not even Mike Morse, the lawyer that's very successful out there.
No, you're Mike Morse, the comedian and the writer. I got a chance to meet you over at Jim Florentine's house for a Super Bowl party, and we had a great time. And we're like, I got to get you on my podcast. And like I said, I've been a fan. Talked to you a little bit. Met you in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, but then officially got a chance to talk to you just a little over a month ago. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
So a couple of things, of course, everybody, let's get the plugs out of the way. Where can we find you on social media? I like to give the plugs first, and then so anyone else, it's like, okay, let's get this out of the way, and then we'll do these sandwich plugs. I'll do it at the end of the show, just so we can get that out there. So where can we find you on social media? Where can we find you on podcasts?
On Twitter, you can find me at Mike Morse, M-O-R-S-E, Mike Morse Says, and on Instagram, Insta Mike Morse. And if you want to see any of our podcasts, it's on the Shuli Network, S-H-U-L-I, the Shuli Network. We do several podcasts there, several a day often.
There you go. If you're watching on the video, that's how you can access it. Go to the Shuli Network there on YouTube. Check out all the Stuttering John and some Stuttering John and a little bit more Stut Joe content if you want to go and check that out. But there's more stuff too. You guys don't do just straight on. You're not one trick ponies when you talk. And we'll talk a little more about John later here in the podcast. But so getting a chance to talk to you about a month ago and finding out that you actually used to write for Mad Magazine.
Yes.
And as somebody, and I know you grew up with Mad Magazine, and I did too, and we just started going on through some of these names. So talk about having an opportunity to write for a magazine that you grew up with. This is something that was the pinnacle for if you were a comedian or writer or artist or all the above. This is what you wanted to achieve, and you made it happen.
Right. And I'm old as hell. So I remember, when I first started getting Mad magazines, probably early 70s. And that's when they were in their heyday, late 60s, early 70s. That was like the top of the game. And and actually in the late 70s, early 80s, I actually went and showed some artwork to them to try to get a job. And William Gaines, the editor, the creator, was really nice. He said, "Come on in, sit down." I was some punk kid. Looked at my artwork and thanked me and showed me around the office. Got to meet all the legendary guys there. And of course, didn't get the job. But then years later, I got recommended as a writer and started working for him. And I would send stuff in, but I also got to go and hang out at the offices there and see a lot of the legendary people and got to know them. And it was an incredible, one of the best things that ever happened to me, really.
Yeah, I mean, getting a chance to write and be a part of Mad Magazine, if people want to go back in time and go see some of your work, of course, I found a couple of them. We got a Goosebumps parody.
Okay.
That apparently you did. And then there was another one. You did a Star Wars parody as well.
Yeah, Inside. Yeah, it was a yeah, I don't remember. You used to send, I'd send so many so many things in, submissions, and a lot of them got taken, some didn't. And so whatever, I know I got the check at the end of the month. So
it's odd because I was watching the movie with Will Forte. It's called A Stupid and Futile Gesture. And
Mhm.
it's about the whole National Lampoon, Doug
Right.
Kenny, and people can go look it up on their own about Animal House and Caddyshack. But it's one thing to think about my generation, the millennials that grew up with National Lampoon. It was a joke. It was nothing but, it was just tits and ass. It
Mhm.
was a college movie. Oh, a bunch of college kids trying to lose their virginity.
Right.
And what we found out was that National Lampoon was essentially licensing their name, that if you had some shitty script that you
Mhm.
wanted out there, you're like, hey, let's do a script where we get really drunk and go on a road trip. And you're like, okay, well, all we have to do is pay a stipend to National Lampoon so it can
Mhm.
say National Lampoon's Drunken Road Trip or whatever.
Right. Right.
And it's odd because the same thing kind of happened with Mad Magazine, is that
Mhm.
it wasn't the same, unfortunately, but at one time, for more of a baby boomer or Gen X generation,
Mhm.
I mean, this was a Bible to a lot of people.
Right. And, strangely enough, they really kept their integrity. Those original guys, they had been bought out, and the offices wanted to move the offices to California. And literally everybody who worked in the New York office said, well, then we'll just all quit. It was like a solidarity thing. So they kept them in the offices there for another 5 years or whatever. And finally, I think it was DC had owned them, and said, well, we're gonna move it out. And that's when it all kind of went to hell.
You mentioned a couple of those writers and people. Like I just wrote some of the names that you mentioned. Bill Gaines, and Bill
Mhm.
Gaines, for folks who want to look it up, I mean, he was so influential with EC Comics,
Mhm.
and what he was able to do back in the day was have this as a subscription-based magazine where there's no ads. If there's
Mhm.
an ad in Mad Magazine prior to like 2002, I think it was a fake ad. It was all
Right.
just goofy Saturday Night Live type of parody. And then eventually they put ads in the magazine, just make it bigger and stuff, and pay the
Mhm.
bills. But Bill Gaines was infamous for being very cheap. He
Mhm.
would have 8 air conditioners in his office, and it's the middle of winter time in New York City, yet would still have these mad trips.
Mhm.
Did you ever get a chance to go on any of these mad trips? I know obviously after Bill Gaines, but did you go on a mad trip at all?
No, that was before my time, unfortunately. But yeah, it was crazy. They would just, send them all down to Costa Rica or some amazing place, and yeah, it was good working there, I'm sure, during those days.
There's a classic story of, I forgot what country it was. It might have been, it wasn't, maybe in the Caribbean, I'm not sure, maybe
Mhm.
Dominican Republic, that they had
Mhm.
a mad trip because they found out one person was a mad subscriber. Do you know about this story?
Oh, I had heard that, yeah.
It's there was one subscriber, so the entire mad office went on this trip and gave the guy, I think, a lifetime subscription. But
Mhm.
I mean, that was the goofy stuff, but you think about the building blocks of starting a comedy career, where you get your humor from, and it's not necessarily from watching Richard Jennings HBO specials, or Robert
Mhm.
Klein or George Carlin. A lot of it started because you went to the newsstand and you saw what do they call them, the what was the tagline they used to call Mad? The Wild Gang of Idiots or something like that?
Yeah, the usual gang of idiots.
Usual Gang of
Yeah.
Idiots. Yeah. What was your interaction? You mentioned Bill Gaines, but did you get a chance to meet Sergio Aragonis, Dick DiBartolo, Jack
Yeah.
Davis, Al Jaffe, any of those guys?
Yeah, Al Jaffe, Sergio, I think Jack Davis had already passed, or not been doing it anymore by the time I got there. But in fact, the last gathering we had, it was for a Comic Con, and they knew that they were going to be leaving, and well, they're all going to be leaving the organization. So they had a big dinner, and I geeked out. I fanboyed out, and I have a great framed um, Alfred E. Newman with a lot of their signatures on it. And I hate doing that. I try not to do that if you're lucky enough to meet someone that you're in, that you admire. But I did it, and now it's hanging up in my living room.
I mean, Jack Davis was the guy that, it wasn't just Mad, but he would commission a lot of
Hmm.
movie posters and trailers and everything. That it was so good, and some of these artists were amazing. And then you also had the others like Don Martin. You had Paul Coker,
Hmm.
who worked with Rankin Bass and did a lot of the Frosty the Snowman specials. And it was, how incredible it was that you were part of it. You may not feel like you were a big part of it, but Mad Magazine again was around, and many of those same guys who started drawing and writing in the 1950s with Bill Gaines,
Mhm.
were drawing and writing for Mad Magazine up until 5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's many of them, yeah, were in their 80s and 90s and still working. And the guy that they had doing the movie parodies over the last, I guess, 10 years, Tom Richmond, who's amazing. He's just an amazing artist, and I, got to meet him and hang out with him, and he was one of the new guys that it's like, wow, this guy is at the top of the game, and then, oh, he knows my name. That's nice.
The new guys, yes. it's amazing. But I remember I talked to I was messaging with Frank Santopadre,
Oh
who,
yeah.
for folks who want to know, he was also Gilbert Gottfried's co-host on his podcast, but he's also a writer and behind the scenes guy in The View and the Joy Behar
Mhm.
show. And I was messaging him about 6 years ago about submitting to Mad, because that was one thing I always wanted to do.
Mhm.
Again, religiously reading it growing up and getting a chance to finally have some interactions. I had Desmond Devlin on the podcast.
Mhm.
Bill Ray might be on the podcast as well.
Mhm. Nice.
And some other people who've been a part of it. And I asked him, I said, it was always my dream to try to submit to Mad Magazine. He's like, yeah, it's not really much of a dream anymore. It's like, because they knew that they were starting to close up shop. They were going to move
Right.
everything to Burbank. And then now Mad is just, it's either memories of Mad TV, which there was barely a crossover outside of a couple of spy versus spy interstitials, but outside of that, it really wasn't much of anything. Or you go to the newsstand and you have a lot of the collections, the best of the 80s, the best of sitcoms. But again, the reason I bring it up and I'm so fascinated by talking about it was it really was the building blocks and the what brought a lot of us our first introduction to more of a sometimes mature, but sometimes more of like an adult humor as a kid, that we were getting away from the Saturday morning cartoons. You're like, no, I get to read this because they actually have like cartoons of tits in this magazine.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's and funny you bring up Frank, is he's the person who got me in there, because he and I were writing some stuff for Howard Stern show, and we didn't know each other, and just happened to have the same, I saw his email address on one of the uh, emails they sent us, and so I just said, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm writing for these guys too," and we ended up hanging out and having lunch, and he was a mad writer, and he's like, "Well, let me help you submit some stuff." So he was very, uh, the guy that did it.
Frank told me that he met Bill Gaines maybe like a week before he died back in
Mhm.
1992, and said that, yet once again, it was February. Everyone's kind of collecting their paychecks and the air conditioners are going on as a blizzard's outside Manhattan.
Right.
But no, but you also wrote for Cracked too.
Yeah, before Mad, I did that for, quite a few years, and it's funny, there was so many offshoot rip-off magazines. There was Thwack, and yeah, they all had weird names. Cracked was the biggest. There was Thwack. There was I forget, but they're
What
all,
was the one that Al Goldstein did?
oh, well, he did
Was
Screw,
that,
but what
well, it
was
was Screw Magazine, yeah. But
yeah,
wasn't there another? I thought there was another one that was
there
kind
might
of
have been,
very close,
yeah.
because he and Bill Gaines were friends.
Right, right. Yeah, I can't remember the name, but yeah, I mean, back when I was just submitting to everything, and sometimes, they would. One of my favorite writing jobs, I used to write for the Weekly World News. Now, I don't know if you remember that newspaper, but it was
Oh, is that the
a,
Bat Boy?
yeah,
That's right. I remember that was, yeah, that was the one with the Bat Child. I'm going to pull it up
yeah,
here really quick.
and that was so great because you had to write the articles, the stories, as straight laced and journalistically sound as possible, but it had to be the craziest premise. Yeah.
What I mean, but that's fantastic, though. I mean, you had an opportunity. You've had a hand in a lot of this, and it's funny when you mentioned, when we were talking about Cracked, because Cracked was always, it was like, oh, that's just the knockoff Mad. But in 2024, as we do this podcast, what is the one that's still around, that's still being shared all over the place? It's Cracked, because
Mhm.
Cracked reinvented themselves as a very online listicle type of, kind of
Mhm.
almost like a goofier BuzzFeed. And
Mhm.
yet Mad never jumped to that next level of starting their website and putting
Right.
opportunities to buy their magazines or subscriptions and having a little bit more interaction on the web. And I always found that kind of interesting. When the early days of the internet, I was going to madmag.com,
Mhm.
and I'm like, it's just nothing. It's like, hey,
Right.
subscribe, send us a postcard, send us a
Right.
subscription. I'm like, what are we doing? Come on, guys, you have a TV show. Why don't you have a little more crossover? But it didn't really happen. But yet Cracked is still around.
Mhm. Yeah, you never know who's gonna survive.
So those early days of you getting into doing comedy writing, but you also did stand up. And what was it that got you into doing stand up? Was this the comedy boom?
It was the comedy boom, and, I'd grown up watching, back in my day, you would watch The Tonight Show and you would see what that new comedian is, and, that was when that could make or break your career, and as a kid, you'd see that and it's like, "Wow, that's really amazing." So, eventually, when there was a comedy boom, I was finishing up college, and I didn't wanna work for a living, so I was like, "Ah, let me give it a shot." And luckily, there was enough places to work out and actually get paid. You'd go and MC and you'd make, 30 bucks, 50 bucks, but you're working. And there was a lot of places like that. So I was very fortunate.
Many people in those days that I've talked to a lot of comics that getting started was you would do a lot of the firehouses, you do these
Mhm.
one-nighters, and you get paid a lot of money. But again, a lot of people knew that the boom was probably going to bust at some point, that within a couple of years there was a Funny Bone, there was an Improv, there's a this and that all over the country.
Right.
And then there were guys that were getting paid in green or white. But then there was other chances where you had a lot of these guys who were addicts that they're like, hey, if you drive me to the gig, I'll put you on
Mhm.
and open for it. I know Bob Levy was one of those guys, and
Right.
Otto was a big
Mhm.
one. That's how guys like Florentine and Jim Norton and
Mhm.
even Gino Bisconti, some of these guys that you would go out on the road with John Fox, for example, and he'd just be just shit faced drunk, and you're like, oh, here's the key, I'll let you do 15 in front. You're like, perfect, that's
Right.
great. So was that a similar situation for you?
Oh yeah, there was several. Otto, of course, was legendary even before anybody else knew who he was. Just that he was so funny and crazy. Um, and there was another guy, Bob Woods, who was the same thing. He was a massive alcoholic, but funny as hell, just larger than life. And you'd pick him up and you'd drive to the gig, and he'd be drinking in the car, drinking at the club, drinking on the way back, and but you got your stage time, and you got to watch somebody who was really good do what they do, and so you would learn and hopefully absorb it.
And being from Jersey and being from that area, you could go into the city, but then you can go out to, like I said, the firehouses out
Yeah.
in Freehold or any of these outside of Jersey places. But even a Tony Roma's, for example, would just put up a brick wall and put a little
Mhm.
stage, and you could just go to your local restaurant, and they were putting up and actually having big comedy nights. But eventually, it fizzled out over time. But did let me ask you this about the comedy boom. Did it fizzle out because of an oversaturation of comedy clubs, or was it cable TV that you can watch a comedy channel / Comedy Central, HBO, Showtime, or were people just kind of burned out that it was just a phase?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a combination. I think also the drinking age changed, and so, there was less people going out, so there was less things, possibilities, to do in your club, so,
Less
yeah, but
three
it
two
was
beer.
right, right, and, so, yeah, and it lasted a good amount, and so people wanted something different. That happens, it's always cyclical.
Well, and then eventually that kind of changes a little bit because then you experience more of a boom in the podcasting age. And
Mhm.
how's it been with the transition? Because uh, when you're talking about the transition of comedy, how a lot of those guys, you can go to any comedy club in New York or in any place in America. The club I perform at, I'll see an entire wall of comics that I'm like, who are they? What are they doing now? You look them up and
Right.
they're just doing Facebook, and it's like, oh, I'm married, I got a farm, I got whatever. They're not doing anything because they didn't adapt to the new millennium. They didn't put their
Mhm.
stuff on MySpace. They didn't put their stuff out there, and then they became forgotten. A lot of those
Right.
80s, 90s acts just went by the wayside. But that people, you like him or hate him, Dane Cook really helped change the business of putting stuff
Yeah.
out there and saying, guys,
Mhm.
even if it's free, you're going to have to try to get some kind of exposure. So, and now you're on podcasts. You're doing, I mean, you're basically your full-time job is doing podcasts now.
Yeah, yeah. We do at least 2 a day and sometimes more, and it's great as I'm sitting my ass and just talking with my friends because I love everybody that I'm working with there, so it's a nice, it's a nice way to make some money.
How did you get on the Stern Show?
Through Bob Levy, he, was in with those guys, and he would come up with bits, and then he asked me to help him start writing bits that would get on the air, and, uh then when Howard went to, Sirius, they started doing the roasts, on the air, and, that was my first time actually on the Stern Show. Bob had me on to roast, Ralph Cirella, Howard's,
Rest in peace.
stylist.
I love John's tribute to Ralph when he passed away.
Yeah, he's so heartfelt, and, yeah, so then that got me on and I got to know everybody there, and I used to send in a lot of song parodies early on in the serious years. I would at least, several a week, and Howard was great and played a lot of them and mentioned my name, and that was really cool. And then, a few years down the line, then Bob and Shuli and myself started doing Miserable Men, first with Florentine before I was even on. That was on Howard's channel, Howard 101. And they do a weekly show. And then Jim left, and I took over for him, and we did that for 5 years and got me more entrenched into the Howard verse, which I'd always been a huge fan anyway. And then eventually, they asked me to start writing, for them, full time.
I mean, it's such a dream job that getting a chance to be on that show. Now, did you before you got on there, did you know how scripted a show like that would be? Because one thing that was a gift for Howard was how back in the day with Jackie, that Jackie was able to slip notes over to Howard and
Mhm.
slip notes to Billy and the Jackie
Mhm.
puppet and everything, that it wasn't as I mean, it was organic in the way that the laughs are organic, but a lot of it was that they did put a lot of show prep into making that and a lot of
Right.
good writing. Were you kind of surprised when you were thrown in there to say, wow, I mean, this show, a lot of it is kind of, we're going by a script this morning?
Yeah, yeah. It definitely changes the way you listen to it. And after I started doing it, it's like, okay, then you get it is a show, and not just let's turn on the mics and see what happens.
Because that's what Opie and Anthony was a little bit more of, was a show that
Mhm.
you would have a guest that would come on, but it's not Bob and Tom. They're not doing their bits,
Right.
but you would have them come on, and sometimes they'd be really good on the air, and then you go see him on stage. You're like, oh, I like this guy because he's naturally funny. He's
Right.
not going up there and doing his, oh, well, yeah, no, I flew in and boy, whatever, insert bit.
Right.
And Opie and Anthony was more of the hang, but at least with Stern, it really was very well written. That's why people like John Melendez and everybody, that it wasn't John coming up with that stuff. It was because they had a great team of writers, and you
Mhm.
had Fred and you had Jackie that could, and Howard too.
Mhm.
Obviously his input was there, but putting something like that on the air was a full team effort. It wasn't just like, hey, I've got this great bit, and then Howard goes to air. It was a whole big production.
Right, right. Although, there were the moments like, whenever Gilbert came in, then it was total anarchy. It was,
Yes.
no matter what they had planned, he would just steamroll it, and those were always the best shows where, they kind of went off the rails for a bit.
Were you disappointed when the you were noticing a little bit of a change to the Marcy Turk stuff, that the Howard Stern of, say, the what the Channel 9 show days to
Mhm.
today is different? Like, how did you feel during that time?
Yeah, well, of course, it wasn't the show that I fell in love with and listened to religiously from when he was on NBC. I listened to him uh, when he was yelling at Don Imus, and that was new radio, and never heard anything like that before, and how much anarchy was involved, and yeah, but things change. You just have to just like Mad, all of a sudden went away and changed. Nothing stays the same.
You kind of adapt, and that's where I've taken criticism when I've listened to Stern, because I think there's a little bit of a difference of, you grow up and you can't just keep throwing meat at girls' naked asses
Right.
for
Right. Yeah.
well into your. I mean, Howard's 70 right now. As we
Yeah.
do this podcast, he's 70 years old. Things you did and you can get away with when you're, say, 35,
Right.
probably a little uncouth, I guess. It
And a little
starts looking
creepy. Yeah.
a little creepy, sometimes a little pathetic having this old man go, there you go. But
Yeah.
there's also another way of you when you take it to a level of you want to become. You sell yourself out. Now, is Howard selling himself out? I don't know. I think also you kind of get comfortable in a situation where you're making the kind of money Sirius expects this kind of show. And now that, again, you are taking the wheel and not being the show that has Sibians, has lesbians writing Sibians, that you're interviewing A-list celebrities. I guess that's just the path. Me personally, not a fan. Not a fan.
Right.
I went somewhere else. I checked out somewhere else. But hey, you know what? Different strokes. There's still a lot of people who are listening.
Right. Right. No, I agree with you 100%. And the interviews are great. I don't listen much anymore, but his interviews are great. But yeah, it's not, if you're looking for the old Howard type stuff, it's not there anymore, and that's okay.
Yet you also wrote for Jay Leno.
Yeah, which was that was interesting because I couldn't let them know I was doing that because they were mortal
What year
enemies.
was this? What year were you writing for him?
This was still during the serious years, the 2010s, 14. I'm very bad with dates, but yeah. And yeah, I was a freelancer. I would send in jokes to Leno every day, and sometimes they get on the monologue, sometimes they didn't. Freelancer, when you're a freelance writer, you just everything, there's shit going out all over the place.
Now, was this around the time when he did that ill-fated 1 hour primetime show?
It was, yeah, actually it was, yeah, in that time frame. And yeah, that didn't last long, did it?
Well, it didn't last long, but I kind of understood it. And for folks listening, hear me out when I say this. The late night show nowadays is a relic of the past. It's kind of, we had the Oscars a couple of weeks ago. Okay, yeah, who's watching the Oscars? Your 75-year-old mom, grandma, that she's watching because she's watched since Bob Hope was hosting. That, oh, the dresses, oh, here's John Cena is naked on stage, and all the goofy shenanigans. But we kind of have the scab has been ripped off, the veil is taken down. And when it comes to late night shows, that the reason we watched it is we didn't have as many options. Even if we had cable TV, you still went to NBC and you watched Letterman, you watched Carson back in the day, you watched Arsenio and Leno eventually with the Tonight Show. It's just kind of gone by the wayside. So Jay puts it out there in 2004 that I'm going to retire in 5 years and Conan's going to take my job. And then he eventually takes that earlier shift. I mean, I can understand why he would do that. It didn't work out, and it kind of screwed a lot of NBC affiliates.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A very, very weird time. And what you said about the Oscars is very funny because I did not know the Oscars were that night a couple weeks ago until the day of. And usually, and I'm sure there was a lot of fanfare on whatever media, but there is so much other things to watch between podcasts and just social media and that I had no idea. I'm like, oh my God, that's tonight. And I still didn't watch it, but at least I knew it was going to be on.
Well, it's funny because during COVID, and I'm a baseball fan. We'll talk a little baseball here in a second. During 2020, when everything was shut down, and then eventually when that dumb season that nobody watched with the cardboard cutouts started,
Right.
I didn't care. I didn't care about the league. I didn't care about any of that.
Right.
And then I can go on YouTube and find old games from that. Let's just say that day in history. So it's 2020. How about I find a game from 30 years earlier? So I'm going to find something from May 20th of 1990 and watch Bobby Bonilla and Barry Bonds with the Pirates play Barry Larkin and Eric Davis with the Reds.
Right.
So I can live in a reality where I'm not living in reality. I created a reality. Right. So therefore we have
and you didn't know how the game was going to end because it was 30 years ago.
Exactly. And yeah, and then you can hear Jack Buck doing the broadcast or Marty Brenneman. Not maybe Marty Brenneman didn't say any homophobic stuff on here. He wasn't in Kansas City, but it was funny because there's so many different options, and that's why this podcast stuff is yeah, you can watch Uncle Rico. You can watch the BS show. You can watch these shows at the live time, but it's also on demand. I can go check you guys out and say, like, yeah, you know what? After I get done with this podcast, I'll listen to this morning's BS show.
Right.
I'll listen to 3 days ago's Uncle Rico show because I can. We have that option. So when I look at the Oscars, I look at late night TV, it's just, I go, wow, this is just an outdated form of entertainment. It just doesn't appeal to me anymore.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Things are changing, and it'll be interesting to see how long they last. There's probably better ways to fill that airtime and get more people watching if you're a network.
Well, and that's what baseball's kind of dealing with right now, is that you're finding newer generations are finding baseball's boring. You have to put a pitch clock. You can only throw over to first base a couple of times. You only have this. The new rules, me personally, and I know you're a Mets fan, I hate the universal designated hitter. I hate it.
Yeah.
I love the strategy. I love the old National League Whitey Herzog, Whitey ball, AstroTurf strategy, pinch hitting, double switch. And instead you have Neanderthal, Earl Weaver type of 3-run homer baseball. Now that's the law of the land. I can't stand it.
Right. Well, I always loved it when you had a really good pitcher that was a really good hitter. And it was like, when the Mets had DeGrom, he was a great batter. And it was like, yeah, bring it on, man.
Dwight Gooden was a pretty good hitter too.
He was pretty good too, yeah.
He played, someone posted a clip last week of when Gooden was playing for the team once known as the Cleveland Indians, my neck of the woods. And Gooden got thrown out after 2 batters because there was a whole big problem. And a lot of people in the comments said, I forgot Dwight Gooden played with the Indians. I'm like, yeah, those goofy type of Joe Namath playing out west and Johnny Unitas. It was one of those. Yeah, it was kind of goofy watching the Chief Wahoo on Doc Gooden's hat. But no, I vividly remember those days of him throwing those 78-mile-an-hour fastballs.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Sometimes you got to know when to say when.
Well, the Mets back in the day, because we were talking over at the party, the 86 Mets, it should have been an absolute dynasty. And it turned into, yeah, they don't have to buy a drink in town again. If Darryl Strawberry's drinking anymore, he'll never have to pay for a dinner. Lenny Dykstra, the whole team.
He is drinking.
Well, yes, he's a little too much. Although he says he hasn't gotten arrested in almost 6 years now. So, but that team should have been full on dynasty. And then you had a couple of the guys like Greg Jeffries and Dave Magadan and David Cohn who were coming up through the system. And yet it turned into 86 was the year. They tried coming back in 88. They had a kind of a run in 90, I believe. But man, that team was just a disaster after that. Talk about those days of being a Mets fan in living in New York, living in Jersey, and being a part of that. It was a cultural phenomenon.
Right. Well, it was great at that point, but being a Mets fan, and I'm also a Jets fan, so it's a double whammy.
Oof.
That yeah.
Did you go see both at Shea Stadium back in the day?
Yeah. But it's I've been really enjoying seeing the football giants have a hard time over the last 10 years, because for years before that, whenever anyone, you're at a party, oh, what team do you like? The Jets, and a Giants fan would go, oh, so sorry. So I got to do that a little bit over the last 10 years, but hopefully they'll be all right. Yeah, but yeah, 86 was amazing. I mean, that was, I vaguely remember 69, I don't know how much I remember, or I just have been told and think I remember, but
I'll leave the obvious joke away. We'll just leave that right there. Because I remember it too.
Yeah. So Mets are like cicadas, like every 20, 30 years, you get a run. And the rest, you just, I actually just went to see down in Port St. Lucie. I saw a spring training game, and appropriately, it got rained out halfway through. So,
of course, yeah. I might be there this week. Actually, I might go up to Port St. Lucie. I'm going down to Florida next week, so I might go check out a spring training game, a little Grapefruit League action. Because the Mets in those days, long gone were the days of from the early 70s, and they were coming back, and Seaver, and then they brought him back as a PR stunt, and George Foster and some of those players. But when Frank Cashen took over that team and said, look, in a couple of years, this team's going to be really good. They draft Strawberry, they draft Dykstra. Eventually, they get Gary Carter behind the plate, solidifying that position. You had the platoon, you had Tuffle, you had Backman. Ray
Heath.
Knight was a great addition. And then, of course, you had Doc Gooden. But the problem is Doc Gooden not only was from the Coke, but Davey Johnson would pitch him well into the 10th inning in some games. He would throw 150 pitches. Of course, he's going to blow his arm out.
Right. That's the way they did it back then, Like Nolan Ryan, how many complete games did he do? Did he have?
Well, another 69 Met. That was, boy,
Right.
talk about that trade.
I never forgave him for trading Seaver to the Reds. I mean, forget it.
Oh yeah, it was the Midnight Massacre.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's funny because I'm not a Mets fan, obviously, but I know so much about it. And then eventually the team fizzles and they can't stay they can't stay out of rehab at that point. And then by the 90s, they say, well, we're just going to throw a bunch of money. We're going to get Brett Saberhagen. We're going to get Vince Coleman. We're going to get Bobby Bonilla, who, of course, we all know they're still paying to this day for another, I believe, 11 more years.
Right.
And that book, I forgot who wrote it. Was it was called like the worst team money can buy. It was such a disaster. I even though that was the team I grew up with, was watching those Mets and seeing Willie Randolph at the end of his career. And oh my goodness, it was embarrassing, those teams.
Yeah. I
Bobby Bonilla trying to fight reporters.
I kind of faded away at that point. That was like, I can't take it anymore. You got to take a little break, and you just, you look at the back of the paper, you're like, all right, they lost again.
Oof, yeah. Well, I mean, they had Buck Showalter, an old school manager, and then no, not anymore. We're not going to do that. It was Buck is a 4-time manager of the year winner, and they turn around really quick. But it's kind of a Billy Martin situation where in that first year, Buck takes over, he cracks the whip, and they're good, but it doesn't last. It doesn't usually last. Although I love Buck.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens this year. It's I'm not overly optimistic.
Yeah,
which is what you have to be as a Mets fan.
Well, it kind of sucks because I've been to Citi Field a couple of times, and it's sterile. These new ballparks. I'm my pinned tweet is I loved going to the old stadiums, and I think baseball and sports in general were better when they still had the Marlboro Man on the scoreboards. And Citi Field, of course, had that in Yankee Stadium. You see that when Reggie hits the third home run off of Charlie Huff in the 877 World Series, and you see this all over. And now I go to Yankee Stadium, the new Yankee Stadium in Citi Field, and it's like walking into a shopping mall that was built like 15 years ago. And sure, there's a Gap store that's there, but it's there's no character to it.
Right. Well, especially Yankee Stadium, because I think they're trying to make it so majestic, but like you said, then there's a TGI Fridays. I was like,
we're gonna go over to the TGI Fridays bar, and there's a Hard Rock Cafe there, because that's what I really want to do. Is when you want to relive the glory days of the '90s Yankees, may as well have the glory days of a '90s chain restaurant.
Yeah, and enjoy a $19 beer there.
So Mike, we'll switch gears and we can end the podcast here in a little bit. I thank you for coming on. But like I said, I met you in Pottstown originally, and you were dressed in a Hawaiian shirt because apparently Perry Caravello thought you were Jackie Martling.
Yeah, for how that happened is we had him on our Uncle Rico show one night, and there was the three of us, Bob Levy, Shuli, and myself, and Perry just started calling me Jackie. Jackie, good to see you. And so we just went with it. I was like, yeah, great to see you, man. How you doing? Oh, I haven't seen you in a long time. So yeah, we of course, it's the first rule is roll with whatever's happening. Pull it, keep it going as long as you can. And so yeah, he called me Jackie through that whole episode, and then we went when we went to Pottstown. Yeah, I was like, all right, I'll be Jackie for this too, and. Yeah, so he still, as far as I know, he still thinks I am Jackie.
There's the flyer of it, although Mike Bichetti wasn't able to make it.
Thank you. I was very busy. Yes,
he's very busy now on Misery Loves Company show.
But
yeah, it was funny. It was funny being at that show because afterward everyone had their opinion on how that show went, and then people are asking me because I was there. They're like, Oh, I heard everyone bombed. I heard there was no one showed up. And I'm like, no, people showed up. It was just it was an odd venue because
Mm.
it was like going to a wedding with dirty jokes, which is what I think every wedding should be. But
Right.
it's tough to have a wedding venue when you seat, however many thousands of people you can fit in there, and yet it's a comedy show that's admittedly it's a niche comedy show. It's not like
Mm.
for the mainstream. You're talking about a character on a radio show from a long time ago, hence the
Mm.
name Uncle Rico. And you also have a character on the show who was in a movie 20 years ago where they pulled pranks on him the whole time.
Right.
So it's a niche of a niche of a niche. So
Mhm.
it was kind of funny how when people were like, "Oh, I heard nobody showed up there," I'm like, "No, there wasn't. People were rabid fans of that show."
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed it. A very strange venue in that it was like an airplane hangar. It was huge, and so you're and so even when you have 200 people or whatever it was, it didn't look like a lot of people because it's such a large venue. And then it was the sound problems, of course, that delayed everything. So it was one of those just very weird gigs, but I had a good time doing it and getting to meet Perry and everybody and you and everyone else there. And yeah, right, Anthony was on that, Kumia was on
Oh
it,
yeah,
and yeah.
good old Ray
Oh,
DeVito was there too.
yes.
Ray
So,
was mad because I was hanging out backstage, even though I wasn't on the show. And I'm like, well, I know a lot of people here, and
right.
I'm also talking to people. I'm not sitting there on my phone or wondering where my pink blanket is or my Montreal Expos hat. I'm sitting here talking to Anthony Cumia because I was a radio guy for 15 years, and which by the way, I'll tell a quick story. So they did when Compound Media was kind of still a thing.
Mhm.
They did a comedians of the compound in my home comedy club,
Hmm.
and they brought Aaron Berg booked it, and we got everything together, and Gino Bisconti and Pat Dixon and everybody, and Anthony Cumia showed up.
Hmm.
And I had this whole thing because I was working in radio, and I said, before I go, at that point when speech impediment man is the most sober person on stage, that's a problem.
It's bad.
So Aaron Berg comes up to me because Cumia's bombed out of his mind. Gino can't even stand up straight. And Berg comes up and says, "Can you do 10?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do 10. I could do that standing on my head." So I go
Yeah.
up there and I'm doing inside jokes or whatever and do my material. And I ended the show because Kumi was there. And I said, by the way, before I leave, for folks, I'm a radio guy too. Radio guy does comedy and stuff like that. And knowing that Anthony Cumia, my radio inspiration, the guy who got me into this business, is here in my home comedy club. He's an inspiration to me. And I'm building this whole thing up. And I'm like, and because of this man right here, I make $27,000 a year. I can barely afford my rent. I have to pass up on things, my vacations. I can't take my wife out for dinner and everything. So Anthony Cumia, go fuck yourself. This whole thing. And I asked him, and he's like, no, I didn't hear it because I was too drunk. I'm
Oh,
like, oh, of course.
yeah. Oh, he's a
But it
funny
was
guy, man.
it was a good time. And then
Yeah.
we had a good time. We were in Atlantic City about a month ago, including
Mhm.
my opportunity to meet the great
Oh.
stuttering John Melendez.
Oh, I've heard of him. Yeah.
So this was the second picture I took with him. This was at the Borgata bar around 12:30, and John was, I believe, at beer number 21 of 25 that night.
Oof. Oof. Wow. That's
And
impressive.
but I gotta say, he wasn't bad that night. Like, he didn't interrupt the comedy show. He
Mhm.
didn't really cause a scene. He did the previous night with him and Patrick Melton and everything,
Right,
but
right.
John was actually a good audience member and hanging out with the fans and taking pictures and stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, everyone bought him drinks, but that's how it
Well,
is.
yeah, that's like, it's like Pavlovian. It's like, give him a beer, you can do anything you want.
Now, did
Uh,
John do anything in particular before this Uncle Rico stuff that to you personally?
no, I had never met him and still have not met him. Well, actually, I lie. I did meet him, uh, when they were still at K-Rock. I went with Bob. Bob had an appearance on Howard, and I was with him. We were hanging out, and John. It was funny because he came up to Bob and was very nice, and he kind of just like looked at me and didn't even say anything. But I was like, I didn't think anything of it. But then getting to know him these years on his podcast doesn't surprise me. He didn't. care about me because I couldn't do anything for him. But so yeah, I didn't know him, but I know what he did to Shuli and what he did to Bob. So when we started doing the Uncle Rico show, I was like, yeah, I'm in. Yeah, gonna help my
Why
buddy.
not? I mean, that's kind of it seems that was the one thing about at the beginning, because when this all started in 2022, when Shuli was up here and doing Kumia shows there, he was kind of like a resident co-host for a week, and this interest in Stuttering John really started heating up because
Mhm.
he's had so many of these feuds over the years and stuff. And uh it was amazing how it started, and I'm wondering, where do we go where it doesn't seem like we're just piling on a guy, and yet it seemed like he just gives people plenty of material to go after him.
He is his own worst enemy. Yeah, he could stop this in various ways. He could stop everybody talking about him if he stopped podcasting, or if he just admitted that maybe he hasn't done everything quite as he should have. But that's not
Which
John.
he did stop podcasting for a bit, and I was wondering, well, that's probably going to be the end of the Uncle Rico show. There's just so much material you're going to go for, and then he decides that one day last summer, yeah, let's start podcasting again.
But we have such a good time doing it, the three of us, and also Anthony Zenhauser, who
Mm-hmm.
joins us on occasion. It's just so much fun. It's like the old days. What you were talking about, the O&A show, when they would have all the comics in and just mercilessly bust each other's balls, and that was always great. That was always fun to listen to, and that's what we do. We're busting each other, the three of us or four of us, and busting John, and it's just great to see how far you can go with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, because what exactly? Let's just go back in time. What exactly did John specifically do that set Shuli and Bob off? Like I've heard so many stories over the
Mhm.
years, and especially being there in Pottstown and watching the
Mhm.
show. And I watch you guys. I don't tune in all the time, but it's always like John's drunk again. Here, let's talk about this. We're like, wait, which episode was John
Yeah,
drunk?
yeah. Episode
But
1 through 300.
because well, and then when I did that, when Chad Zumach and I,
Oh,
when we went on with John last year, oof,
mhm.
I got to tell you, I actually started getting drunk. I had to go to a funeral that night, and I was drinking with John, and every time,
Mhm.
skull,
Right.
we're raising a glass, and I started getting like, oh boy. Because the trolling could only go so far. Because now I'm like, I'm starting to get a buzz here. I've had about 3 beers just with keeping up with John alone. Except John's drinking a Coors, I'm drinking an IPA that's like
Right.
10%. So, but it was just funny. If people don't know what we're talking about, go check it out. But again, getting back to it, what exactly did John do that set off Shuli and Bob?
Oh, I will get to that, but that is one of my favorite episodes, what you and Chad did. I think about it often, and it makes me laugh. Well, Shuli can tell it in more detail, but basically, John was accusing Shuli of being a mole while Shuli was working for Howard. Uh, accused Shuli of being a mole for the giving him information, inside information about the Stern Show, which of course Shuli was not, and Shuli had no idea why he was doing that. And John would not admit that he was lying. So that kind of set things off, and there was other things as well. And with Bob, I mean, he never had a huge problem with uh, John, but John did hit on Bob's girlfriend while it actually was his wife. I didn't even realize until recently that they were actually married when this happened. But Bob and his wife had a big fight, public fight on Twitter, because that's what Bob does. And so uh, after he said he's through with her, not long after, John's like, "Yeah, do you mind if I call her up?" Which is kind of a shitty thing to do. And then he did contact Gina, and she refused his advances, and John was kind of nasty and rude to her. So that's where that stems from.
Yeah, that's I was wondering what was going on with that, and I remember the Gina thing. I didn't know which wife it was
Hmm.
with Bob.
This is the lucky number 4.
Number 4, because I actually, I shouldn't say this on here, but I did know his third wife because she's from Cleveland.
Okay. Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, but anyways,
I'm not bragging.
that's how I got to know Bob. Actually,
I've known all 4.
Bob is the reason he gave me my first opportunity of getting on stage. He's the one who encouraged me to get on and well, it was either him or Don Jameson. It was my first paid gig on stage, but I always thanked Bob because Bob encouraged me to go up and start doing open mics.
Wow, great.
So
Yeah,
I've always been appreciative of Bob Levy.
he is great. He's great to comics. He'll do anything for people who need help. There he is playing his trumpet.
Yeah, there's so for folks who've I'm sure everybody watching or listening to this probably knows about Shuli, Bob Levy, and of course my guest today, Mike Morse, with the Uncle Rico Show on the Shuli Network, and all the great shows that like the Rock Bottom podcast. Oh wait, no, that's not on there anymore. There you go. There's Mike.
Yeah, there I am with my girlfriend Assie.
So, but no, that's I appreciate you coming on here and everything, and yeah, go check out their show. And again, it's a niche; it's not for everybody. I tell this that was the whole thing about Perry Caravello and Windy City Heat. Is I've tried to get some of my friends and my family members into watching this, and they're like, "Tony, I don't get it. I don't get it. He's a lunatic who just yells for no reason." I said, "That's the best part about it."
Right.
And my wife, we're at the point with Perry. I cannot. I think I actually, because you got a chance to meet her at Florentine's party too,
Right.
and I think we talked about this, that I can only watch Perry, his PCL, when she goes to bed. It's like pornography.
Yeah.
That like I have to wait. Like, is the wife gone? Is the wife out of the room? Okay, great. And I just hear this guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gotta lock the door. Yeah. Don't want her walking in.
But I told her, I said, look, I don't watch your Vanderpump, I don't watch your Real Housewives show and everything. Perry Caravello, Windy City Heat, Big Three, all that stuff. All this whole universe, Uncle Rico, everything like that, Stuttering John. This is my Real Housewives and Vanderpump.
Right. I'm just amazed so many people are interested in our stuff and the other stuff in the Dabbleverse. And there are couples. There's couples who watch it together, and it's like that's a bonding experience, I guess.
Yeah, the amount of women who were into it. It was strange being in Pottstown, and I'm like, what are you women doing here? Like, I remember going to old O&A events, and it was just dudes, and the only girls who were there were just hired strippers or something, just to
right.
to flash the crowd and whip them out Wednesday stuff. And yet, I go to Pottstown, and I'm seeing a bunch of these like girls who are really into this. I'm like, what are you doing here? I thought this was full on testosterone, male driven stuff. But I think what it is, and I talked to Zenhauser about it, and I also talked to Vince, the lawyer, about it after he gave us a nice cross examination over it, is that I think the reason why people are so attracted to the Uncle Rico Show and the whole Stuttering John Dabbleverse is everybody knows a John. Everybody has somebody in their life, a coworker, a friend, an ex-friend, a family member who acts like him, who walks out on tabs, who treats people like this, who you're on their good side one day and then you do one thing and it's just the extreme. And I think that might be what it is. That might be the appeal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think so. And as for, women enjoying it, it's also kind of taken down a guy who thinks he's the alpha male. So
that's true. Yeah. Well, that's it's honestly it's a very good point, and it's just it's so absurd that it's still going on, yet you guys just have just a boatload. He's just giving you a boatload of material.
Right. Well, I always think of it as, and this is a hugely old reference. That's not even Photoshop there, by the way. That it reminds me of the Marx Brothers when they're circling Margaret Dumont or one of the other straight people in their movies, where there's this madness going on, and the person that they're doing it to doesn't even really get it. They don't understand what's happening, and you're cutting the guy's tie, and you're doing shit to him, and they don't think it's funny at all, and everybody else thinks it's hilarious.
You found the right podcast, because I think there's might only be like 3 podcasts in the world who ever mentions Margaret Dumont, and this is one of them.
Yeah, Frank's podcast would have been one of the other ones.
Yeah, how many times have I mentioned Shemp Howard or Zeppo on this podcast is alarming, and the
Yeah.
audience who said it are like, dude, you're
Yeah.
talking about people who've been dead for
Yeah.
70 years. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Is it like what's better, that or again John Cena naked at the
Right.
Oscars? I'll take if I'm going to go with the current entertainment, I'm going to go into Uncle Rico stuff. I'm watching
Mhm.
Perry Caravella, but everything else is before 1970 for me.
Right.
But
Yeah, I mean, comedy-wise, are you gonna watch anything on network TV anymore? Unfortunately, probably not.
well, unless, of course, the great Mike Morse is writing there for me.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
But go to Mike Morse Says there on Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it, and go check him out again on the Uncle Rico Show on the Shuli Network. Mike, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. And
Thank you.
not that I need to tell you best of luck, but you guys are really, hate to say it, but old school term of rocking and rolling. You guys
Mhm.
have plenty of material to get through with John and with everybody else. But you guys are by the way, you guys have gigs coming up too. You're going to be out in California and a couple other places, right?
Yeah, actually, let me quickly pull up my calendar here, because yes, this March 29th, Friday, March 29th, we'll be at Uncle Vinny's Comedy Club in beautiful Point Pleasant, New Jersey, and then the next day, Saturday, March 30th, at Governor's in Long Island, and then we're going to be in Huntington Beach in May 17th and 18th. At I forget the name of the club now, but we'll be there doing 4 shows. Early shows, 2 shows each night. Early show is comedy. Late show is a live Uncle Rico.
That is at the I'll pull it up for our audience here, but that is at
The
in
Rec
Huntington
Room.
Beach at the Rec Room,
Yeah.
May 17th and 18th. So go check that out. And are you going to go to the Pickwick pub while you're out there?
100%.
Again, more insight. There are some people probably listening that's like, Pickwick, what are you talking about? Doesn't go check out the Uncle Rico Show. You know exactly what we'll be talking about.
I'm also into it because that's where they filmed The Office. For their pub in the TV show The Office was actually the Pickwick pub.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that until fairly recently.
Well, no wonder John was going there. Maybe I'll get discovered.
Right.
I also was on NBC.
Right.
But Mike, thank you so much for doing the podcast. And I look forward to talking with you soon. And maybe one of these days I'll be able to try and bring you guys on a Midwest tour and come on through Cleveland, Columbus, Detroit, see what pick up the vibe and get you guys maybe a one-nighter or something in this area.
I would love to do that, man. I love the Midwest. I love Cleveland. I've been there many a times.
I apologize. Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, everybody, for listening again. Give me a 5-star review if you want. Subscribe to my podcast on the major podcast platforms, as well as YouTube and Rumble. And if you want more podcasts from me, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur, the Check Your Brain podcast, $3, $5, and $10 tier for extra content. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the show. And I'll be back with you next week with another free episode of this very fine, non-award-winning podcast. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.